What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 27th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And, of course, the lunar eclipse is underway, and because it can't be seen from North America or even here in Hawaii, I didn't make a big deal about it. But there is a live video feed for those of you who want to go and be able to say, I saw this longest, greatest eclipse record setter, and so forth and so on. Apparently, some preachers come on out and said that the rapture is going to be happening during this eclipse. And I'm not hearing anything yet, but we'll see what happens with that. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, criticisms, and so forth here. So let's start out with the war zones here, because there's a lot of stuff going on. Over in Syria, the Syrian army has eliminated over 600 ISIS members in southern Syria, and ISIS is now on the verge of a full collapse. And over the past few days, the Syrian Arab Army, led by the 4th Armored Division and the Tiger Forces, have liberated over 30 villages and settlements from the terrorist group in the area west of Daraa. So it's all over but the shouting, really. And unless the U.S. just wants to go on out and do a decapitation strike against Assad, they lost this one. And I'm sure there'll be some kind of spin about, oh, you know, we were just there to fight ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're gone now, but we have to stay to make sure they don't come back. But the real agenda was always to replace Assad and put in a pro-U.S. junta in his place. 7 years, all those lives, all that money, and they lost this one. There's no other way to put it. So, anyway, let's take a phone call. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. First of all, don't listen to these preachers. They're not telling the truth. and I consider myself a Christian, but a lot of these guys are not telling the truth. They need to read the Bible correctly. So, but, you know, today Donald Trump was very happy regarding the increase of our economy by 4.1%. But what he failed to tell people, we also increased the credit deficit consumer credit deficit by $129 billion. Yes. In the current consumer deficit right now, it stands at $15 trillion. So are we improving or not?
Well, you know, I don't think we should assume that Donald Trump is being any more honest with the economic figures for the country than his predecessors. That's just going to be a reality. Obama and Bush were saying the economy is recovering and all these wonderful things are happening. Trump comes on in and says, oh, my goodness, the economy is really in bad shape. And the Democrats are going to say, well, Trump wrecked the economy. And so he's kind of constrained to basically just go along and maintain the previous deceptions. Great if it's true. I'm not ready to bet the farm on it.
I would agree, yeah. And finally, Michael, I was reading where Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio wants to be the next Speaker of the House.
Yep.
Don't take this the wrong way. The last Speaker of the House that was a wrestler and a wrestling coach was Dennis Hastert. I don't think the country wants that.
I had forgotten.
I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm not saying that he's guilty, but the fact is, I don't think the country wants to go through that again.
I sense a small rush to judgment here. We don't know that he's actually done anything like that, and merely because he has that in his resume, anything is possible, but I don't think we should be jumping to any conclusions on that yet.
Okay, then. Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You have a nice weekend.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Same to you. And we're going to switch over to George in Texas.
Okay, then. Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You have a nice weekend.
Okay.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Same to you. And we're going to...
Okay. I was hearing an echo there. George in Texas, are you there?
Yeah, yes, I am, Mike.
Okay.
How's your day?
Well, we're having some technical glitches we're having to deal with here, but other than that, we're doing fine. What's on your mind today?
Well, speaking of the rapture, even looking at notes before the Bolshevik Revolution, the communists infiltrated the church and said, you're going to be teleported out of here before all this stuff happens. Well, guess what? A lot of Christians were murdered in the Red Terror. When it came to Korea and Red China, they all said, you're all going to be teleported out of here, and you're not going to have to go through this. And guess what? They had to go through it, and they've been murdered. And the thing is, it's like this rapture theory is there for one thing, to get the Christians to stand down and not confront evil.
Well, the rapture really came out of the Scofield Bible, which is also the foundation for the Christian Zionist movement. And a lot of people don't agree with it, but it's been hyped and promoted. And the fact of the matter is that going all the way, in virtually every religion, but for the entire 2,000-year history of Christianity, there's always somebody out there saying the world is going to end, soon. The Jehovah's Witnesses were in the business of regularly predicting the end of the world until after so many failures they stopped doing that. In fact, I have an article I wrote called "Oh Rapture" that's just a catalog of all those failed prophecies for these things. So we like to joke about the rapture and say, if you get raptured up to heaven, can I have your house?
Well, another thing, Mike, the thing is, I will withdraw my YouTube premium subscription. Because I could tell you one thing, I watched Cobra Kai, and I could tell you one thing, that was a very good 10-part series, or 30-minute each. But the thing is, if they cut your live broadcast, I will withdraw my YouTube Red Premium.
Okay, well, this weekend I'm looking into switching over to the real video to get away from that censorship. But there may be a change in the wind regarding that social media censorship because they took one step too far, and I think they're about to be hit with a backlash. And I don't mean just the drop in the stock prices for Facebook and Twitter.
But did you ever get to see Cobra Kai yet?
No, I haven't. I will try and make room for it in my copious free time.
Well, I could tell you one thing. It's like there's no villain in it, and it pretty much is trying, to find the similarities between John Lawrence and, Daniel LaRusso, and John Lawrence is trying to struggle to find balance in his life, and Ralph Macchio is just, it's worth watching, Mike.
Okay.
I'll tell you that right now. All right, have a good weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open, and we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So getting on back to Syria, Bashar al-Assad is saying the white helmets are terrorists, and the ones who are still in Syria will be killed unless they lay down their arms and surrender immediately. And so apparently those white helmets that were evacuated out of Syria by Israel was apparently the leadership, along with Mossad-linked assets, and probably any kind of al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, ISIS commanders who could actually document the support coming in from the West. But apparently they left a lot of their own people behind in Syria, and Assad is saying they have to put down their weapons and surrender. So this thing really is coming to an end. Now, yesterday, pardon me, we were reporting on how... just a second here. We seem to be having a little bit of a technical difficulty. I just lost my headphones. Okay, there we are. We're back. This equipment's all getting very, very old here. Yesterday we were reporting on how Israel, in response to 2 missiles that had been flying over Syrian territory, errantly is the word they used to describe it, they launched an attack against the launch platform that they thought had fired the missiles. And big blunder here, they actually hit an ISIS missile facility. So there's a little bit of a whoopsie there here. Now, as you know, Mike Pompeo earlier this week was testifying before Congress, laying out our foreign policy, and made this comment about how the U.S. is going to have a hard time prying Crimea back from Russia. and he made the statement that the Russian sanctions will remain in place until Russia gives Crimea back. And Pompeo said that the United States will never recognize Crimea as a part of Russia, and basically went back to the situation about Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea, blah, 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 blah. Okay, one more time. Following the U.S.-backed coup that ousted the democratically elected Yanukovych and replaced him with Poroshenko and the junta, the people of Crimea held a referendum to secede from Ukraine, which passed overwhelmingly. Then the people of Crimea held a second referendum to merge with the Russian republics, which also passed overwhelmingly, and that is how they wound up being part of the Russian republics. Now, the United States is refusing to recognize the Crimean people's right to such referendums, even though they're guaranteed that right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the United States, as a member of the UN, is obligated to recognize. And the U.S. attitude is we don't recognize the right of the Crimean people to self-determination. Therefore, by default, Russia stole Crimea. It's flat-out lies. It's propaganda. There's not a breath of truth in it whatsoever. And the logic behind it is like being at a wedding and seeing that one of the bridesmaids there refuses to recognize the bride's right to marry that groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the bride. That's the quality of thinking we're getting out of our foreign policy establishment right now. And it is alarming for Pompeo to be out there still promulgating this propaganda, which we all know is nonsense, and throwing sanctions around left and right. That's the U.S. latest weapon. Weaponized sanctions. They're sanctioning Russia, they're sanctioning Iran, they're threatening sanctions on any other countries that don't go along with the U.S. sanctions on Russia and Iran. And I can imagine those other countries are getting pretty darn sick and tired of all of it, which is why more and more of them are just moving to do business without dealing with the United States. Just, U.S. doesn't have anything we want. We don't need them as a market because the consumers are all broke. Let's just go elsewhere here. Now, Trump has apparently delayed the second meeting with Putin that was due to take place in Washington, D.C. until sometime next year. And I imagine that is probably coming under pressure from the war hawks, who are still terrified that Trump is going to calm down relations with Russia and just spoil that whole military-industrial complex money machine. And all those defense contractors, they're out there crying and screaming and rolling around on the floor and pounding their fists and feet and saying, no, 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 we've got to have the threat of war and a really bad enemy so that we can just go on sucking money out of the taxpayers' pockets and spend it on all these weapons, which may or may not work, but they look really good. Now, Putin has responded by issuing an invitation to Donald Trump for a meeting in Moscow. And said, we're ready to invite Trump to Moscow. And by the way, he has such an invitation. I told him about it. And says Putin is willing to go to Washington. So Putin, again, the global statesman, he wants to calm things down. It's only the U.S. war machine that wants to keep the threat of war, if not a real war, going. I mean, if you think about the last 17 years of war in all these countries, all over the world, the military-industrial complex has made a ton of money. And they don't want that to stop. Because like Wall Street, they're money junkies. It doesn't matter how much they've got to have more. It's not having the money that's the thrill, it's getting more of it. They're addicts. And like any other addicts, the money junkies are destroying the society around them. Now, over in Ukraine, Poroshenko may be wishing he hadn't taken the job because things are deteriorating there. Apparently, there has been a bloody gunfight between neo-Nazi militants and the SBU Special Forces. Now, the SBU has been trying to disarm these neo-Nazi groups, and they basically ran into a fortified building and some medium weapons. So we'll see what's happening on that. So let's turn to Iran, because that is clearly heating up. We've been hearing the rhetoric going on. And so people are asking, what are the prospects for a U.S. war on Iran? Well, we know that the U.S. has been talking about war on Iran for a very long time. Remember when John McCain was dancing around on the stage and going, bomb, 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 Iran, bomb, 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 Iran, and then laughing his head off. He thought it was just so funny. You know, yeah, we're going to drop bombs all over this people, we'll kill a bunch of people, and it's going to be great. It'll look wonderful on the evening news here. And unfortunately, I wish the Iranian leadership would tone down their responses. And I recognize that Trump has been very belligerent in his tweets to Iran, but Iran should not have bitten the bait, as it were, because all it did was fuel the escalation. Now, of course, the White House has actually convened a policy meeting on Iran to decide what exactly they're going to do, which there are already the sanctions. What's the next step they can take after that? There's really only one. And reports out of the Wall Street Journal suggest a limited military option may have been discussed. And I love these comments that came on out here about how Iran's tweets saying we will defend ourselves are viewed as threats by the U.S. government. And the U.S. government also issued a statement saying that the government isn't interested in regime change in Iran. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. Because the U.S. government has been regime changing Iran all along. They did it successfully in 1953. They tried again in 2009. That one failed. Of course they want regime change. They want Iran's oil on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. The private central bankers want Iran enslaved to a private central bank. It's one of the few countries left on earth that isn't a slave to a private central bank. And of course, Israel wants Iran smashed up so that Israel can exert its hegemonic domination over the Middle East here. Now, a very alarming story. This came out of this came out of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. Sources within the Trumbull government are telling the Australian Broadcasting Corporation their information is that the U.S. is preparing to bomb Iran's nuclear capability as early as next month. Now, everything that Iran has that is a nuclear capability, they are allowed to have under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So once again, the U.S. will be violating that treaty that both Iran and the U.S. signed and ratified in order to go on in with the bombers. But worse than that, think about all the suffering that came out of, well, for example, Fukushima or Chernobyl, and all the people around those disasters who came down with cancers and leukemias and the rest of it. That's what the U.S. is going to do to the people of Iran, because if they blow up those nuclear facilities, any radioactive materials that are in there are going to be spread to the winds. Apparently, the reason Australia knows about this is Australian intelligence is helping to pick the targets. So is British intelligence. So if you've already got Australian intelligence and British intelligence involved in the planning, it looks like it's a done deal. They're going to go on in and blow up Iran's nuclear capability. But you know something? That won't stop the war, because Iran still has the long-range missiles, and they might respond to an attack on their nuclear facilities by launching some of those long-range missiles at Israel, the way Saddam did when Iraq was attacked. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And yes, once again, we are holding out the collection plate or the hat or whatever. Republic Broadcasting Network needs your help. We're literally in a war where the forces that want to keep you ignorant are trying to shut us all down. And I find it very ironic that the very same corporate media that is screaming Trump is abridging their First Amendment right to freedom of speech turns around and then celebrates the shadow banning or outright banning of independent media on corporate media's platforms. But that's where we are right now. This is a war between ignorance and knowledge, truth and lies. We need your help. So the postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can call in a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. Now, getting on back to Iran, Tucker Carlson came on out with an observation that an Iran war would probably destroy Trump's presidency, and yes, it probably would, because we, the American people, are war-weary. We've been at wars all over the globe for 17 years now. And it's cost us a huge amount of money. It's cost a huge amount of lives. A lot of Americans are just tired of seeing our young ones come back from these war zones in boxes or in wheelchairs. And they're not enthusiastic for another war. And one of the reasons that Trump managed to beat Hillary Clinton into that Oval Office is he promised he was going to end all these wars. And yes, all presidents do that. Obama did the same thing in 2008. But right now, the American public are very angry. And I think in this current case, they would hold Trump to account if he breaks that promise come 2020. Now, Iran is now forming a partnership with Pakistan to jointly produce defense equipment. And obviously, both Pakistan and Iran feel they need to enhance their defense relations and basically pool their military resources, like military education, pilot training, military drills, and of course, cooperation between the defense industries. So everybody's gearing up. Everybody knows what's going on here. Meanwhile, down in Israel, Israel's forces are continuing to use lethal force against Palestinian civilians who are participating in peaceful demonstrations organized within the activities of the Great March of Return and breaking the siege in the Gaza Strip. They just had their 17th week in a row of peaceful demonstrations, and once again, they were fired on. And the Israeli forces killed at least one, possibly two, of the protesters and wounded 5 others, including 2 children. Now, Israeli police raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque following some clashes where Palestinians were throwing rocks at the Israeli police who were basically encircling the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, this site is an emblem of Palestinian statehood hopes and a frequent catalyst to their conflict with Israel. And basically, the police justified this raid, which doesn't happen very often, as pursuit of youths who had thrown rocks and fireworks at them. And the troopers went into Al-Aqsa, trying to find these youths, and basically halted the prayers. And the older male worshipers were allowed to eventually leave after being searched. Now, to nobody's surprise, Israel's army has been investigating what happened down there on the border with Gaza. And it's clearing itself. They're saying they're innocent of any wrongdoing. And I am not kidding you. This did not come out of the Onion. Israel is claiming that all the Palestinians who were wounded or killed simply walked into the paths of already fired live ammunition. That's what they said. That the IDF just fired blindly into a crowd. not intending to necessarily hit anybody, and these Palestinians just threw themselves in front of the incoming bullets just to make Israel look bad. Now, Israel's occupation forces have closed the entrance gate of the Palestinian village of Nabi Salah in the central occupied West Bank district of Ramallah. This is the home village of Ahed Tamimi. And Israel is just ramping up the provocations. Apparently, a large number of occupation forces were deployed in the village and completely closed off its entrance, forcefully preventing residents from either entering or exiting. Those on the inside are being kept in. Those who are outside are being kept out. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Israel has shut down the Hind al-Husseini College in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem, prohibited an academic conference from taking place, and detained 15 participants of the conference. And police were acting on the order of Gilad Erdan, Israel's Minister of Public Security and Strategic Affairs, who claimed the conference was going to promote incitement against the state of Israel. And apparently, Israel is now refusing to renew the visas of visiting professors for other institutions of learning in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. So they're basically just, again, trying to dumb them down. Now, as well as being in charge of policing, Erdogan heads Israel's global effort to thwart activism in support of Palestinian rights. At this point, I think they're beginning to understand a line has been crossed, and people are refusing to go along with Israel as the victim and the Palestinians are the villain. Now, here's an interesting little story. Over in Jordan, as you know, there is this Israel-Jordan gas pipeline that's under construction. And the Jordanians don't want to have anything to do with it. So apparently there was this Jordanian company was misled into selling sand that would go into building the pipeline. And the Dwari contracting company was told the sand was for a fellow Jordanian citizen and sent the trucks carrying the materials on that understanding. When they got to the building site and realized it was for the pipeline, they turned around and left with the sand. So the world is definitely turning against Israel. And after the horrific behavior, who can blame them for that? Now, North Korea has returned the remains of U.S. war dead. In fact, Fox News was just running a story on that a minute ago, interviewing a woman whose father was missing in North Korea and hoping that the returned remains will include the father. But apparently the C-17 aircraft containing the remains departed Wonsan, North Korea on its way to Osan, and a formal repatriation ceremony will be held there on the 1st of August. So that issue is coming to an end. It's one area of tension that is being taken off the table. Now, not too long ago, we mentioned about how the Zumwalt destroyer, the stealth destroyer, $7.5 billion each. The second one had gone out for sea trials and suffered an engine failure. And it was a little bit bigger than was originally reported. It needs an entire engine to be replaced at a cost of $20 million. So the U.S. modern weapons are fragile despite all the money being put into them. They're delicate and they're fragile. And you know something? These are supposed to be weapons of war. And I understand the doctrine here is that if the ship can't be seen, it doesn't have to be rugged, it doesn't have to fend off artillery shells or missile attacks or anything. But that's really wishful thinking, because the other side is already probably hard at work developing a technology to detect the ship from a distance, despite its stealth. And I think this attitude of being overly dependent on active defensive systems was illustrated by something that happened a few years ago, where an Arleigh Burke cruiser was experimenting with a drone. And the person controlling the drone lost control of it, and it plunged through the side of the housing where the spy phased array radars are run from. And it punched right on through the thin aluminum and destroyed $30 million worth of computer equipment. So they're big money makers, but I got to tell you, their survivability in a real war is a gray zone. Remember what happened to the USS Donald Cook in the Black Sea? One single Russian electronic warfare aircraft shut that ship down 12 times in a row. The crew was reportedly totally demoralized by what happened, because they'd been strutting around with what's called aegis arrogance. You know, we're the best that's out there. And the Russians said, no, you aren't. And then the Russians, who've got a great sense of humor, minted a commemorative coin of the encounter. Now, remember a while back, Donald Trump was talking about starting a space force. And we're going to take war into outer space, which I think is a bad idea. He may have talked about it, but in the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act bill agreed to by the House Senate Conference Committee, it's not funded. It doesn't even mention the term Space Force. So Trump is not going to get that. Not yet here. So let's talk about domestic politics here. And right now, Robert Mueller is pinning all of his hopes on the fact that Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, has apparently been flipped and is now willing to testify that Trump knew of and approved the 2016 meeting with Russians who were offering him dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now, Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, says Cohen was not credible. I tend to agree. Cohen has been caught lying before. And you have to look at this from Cohen's own self-interest. Mueller must have something on him. And Cohen must have been pressured into making these statements, because by doing so, he has wrecked his own career. And I'm sure he liked his career, made lots of money, knew a lot of important people, wanted it to keep on going. But because of what he has done, both with this and the tape recordings, nobody will trust him anymore after the way he's betrayed his former client. When people do business with a lawyer, the lawyer is expected to keep all secrets after that. Cohen just destroyed that for himself. And together with the fact that he was taping meetings with clients, he'll be lucky to get work defending drunk drivers. So he had to have been coerced. It doesn't make sense he would do this from his own point of view of wanting to preserve his career and keep on doing what he's been doing. So some kind of coercive force had to be applied to him to flip him. Which means Giuliani is right. Everything Cohen is saying is a lie. He's being told, unless you say this about Trump, we will move forward with prosecuting you for tap dancing barefoot on shag carpeting, or whatever it is they've got on him. Now, Devin Nunes, in talking about the Carter Page visa application, Nunes has seen what's under the redactions. And while he's not giving that information out, he's waiting for an official declassification. He is out there saying that what's in there is really bad for the FBI. It basically shows that the FBI just went forward on this situation on flimsy, virtually non-existent evidence. And the FBI is trying to keep its image polished, which it's a little too late at this point. The FBI's image right now is shot in the minds of the American people. Polls are showing that. Same thing with the Department of Justice. Somewhere down the road, they'll probably rebrand, change their name, change their official colors, and say, we're the new investigative whiz-bang. You can trust us now. That will be the day. Now, over at Fusion GPS, they've had a little bit of a setback because the federal judge in the lawsuit against BuzzFeed has ordered them to answer a wide-ranging series of questions on the infamous Steele dossier. This is coming from the Daily Caller's Chuck Ross. U.S. District Court Judge Ursula Ungaro issued the decision Tuesday in a defamation lawsuit a Russian tech executive filed against BuzzFeed News, which published the dossier on January 10th, 2017. And BuzzFeed did err in publishing this without vetting it. Now, this dossier had gone to a lot of media outlets, most of whom really thought it was a put-up job and prudently didn't publish it, but BuzzFeed did, and now they're being sued for defamation. But as part of their defense, they basically want to find out exactly how that dossier was created. Because if they can basically demonstrate in court that it was a manufactured fraud, then the onus shifts from BuzzFeed to Fusion GPS. Now, Fusion GPS has been refusing to disclose any information, but now they're under a court order. They have to talk to the BuzzFeed lawyers. As one of our callers mentioned before, Jim Jordan has officially announced his bid to be House Speaker, and he's going to throw his hat into the ring and run for House Speaker after Paul Ryan announced he would not seek re-election. But he's making the election, the announcement today. And essentially what's going on here, first of all, Jim Jordan is assuming the GOP will maintain control of the House, which at this point is actually a pretty good bet. That's where the poll numbers are going. We're going to be talking a little bit about that further on in. Article coming out of Information Clearinghouse, the treasonous Democratic Party. And they're lauding Tucker Carlson for a recent broadcast in which Carlson showed that Democrats have gone far beyond just lying through their teeth and political partisanship into outright deranged hatred of President Trump and the American people who elected him. Remember when Hillary was calling us all deplorables? They really do hate us. They're absolutely incensed. Now, a new poll has found the majority of Democrats actually believe Russia tampered with vote tallies to get Trump elected, even though there is actually no evidence that that happened. It's got no basis in fact. And this is why I say that belief is a bad thing. Because the Democrats are believing the Russians tampered with the election. They're acting on that belief even though it did not actually happen. And that's why I say you should never just go on a belief. If you don't know, you don't know, and just stop there. If you don't know, find out if you can. But don't just say, I believe XYZ, because a lot of bad stuff happens with people who believe in things that are not true and are not real. Now, finally, somebody is taking a look at this election system of ours, and Devin Nunes has come on out suggesting that it's time to ban the electronic voting machines in order to start to restore election integrity. And that's a very, very good first step, because we know those electronic voting machines can and are being hacked. In fact, they're very easy to hack. If you go over to Bev Harris, blackboxvoting.org, she was one of the first people to come on out and point out that the Diebold voting machines, which were made by the very same company that makes automated teller machines that never lose a penny from one end of the country to the other, and they have paper trails allowing for complete audits, and they're very well respected. But this same company produced a voting machine with at least 12 documented ways of getting in and changing the election outcome without leaving a trace. It had to be intentional. Remember the other day we were reporting that ES&S voting machines came on out and finally admitted that yes, their machines can be accessed remotely. We have to get rid of those electronic voting machines. All right, let's take a phone call here from Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
You know, I was just wondering when I first listened to that CNN breaking news tape on the Cohen secretly recorded recordings between him and Donald Trump. First thing came to mind was just like what you spoke. That was the attorney-client privilege was broken big time. The next question I had for myself was, why would he secretly record something like that? And the third was, first of all, how did they get it over to CNN? How did they get their hands on it? If it's part of the whole investigation, Mueller should have hung on to it. But it seems that somebody got to Michael Cohen, pretty dang early here in order to secretly record something without Donald Trump's knowledge. I just thought about that. And, you know, and killing a personal story here, this is not a criminal thing. This is a crime against his wife, maybe, for adultery. But killing a personal story that may make you look bad, paint you bad, is not against the law. And so I have yet to hear too many people talk about it. I think you've spoken about it, but I'd be looking at maybe there's a bribery extortion deal going on here about a woman said, I'll ruin your career, I'll ruin your chances unless you pay me, but nobody's ever gone in that direction, and I think they should.
Okay, well, let's back up here a little bit because, first of all, apparently Michael Cohen has been taping his meetings with all of his clients all along. And that is, definitely going to be a reason people don't want to do business with him anymore. And the official story is that the tape involving the payment it actually wasn't to the Playmate, it was to the National Enquirer for the rights to the story, was apparently part of the material seized by the FBI when they raided Cohen's office. And that's where that came on out. But you're right. Somebody inside the Mueller investigation leaked that tape out to the media to harm Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it just points out the fact that they really don't have much to work with. And this is why they're going down this pathway here to find anything they can. They're way off point on the Russian collusion investigation. And now just bring him down any way you can is their philosophy, I guess.
Well, Cohen may have hoisted with his own petard on this one because he's trying to claim that Trump knew about all this meeting where the Russians were going to give him dirt on Hillary Clinton, like there wasn't already enough floating around the United States. But I'm sure people are going to be asking, if Cohen was taping everything, where's the tape that documents that Trump knew about this? Because right now it's just a case of he said, he said. And as Giuliani says, there's no evidence to back it up. And Cohen is a lawyer.
His political career, his career is over.
Yeah,
as an attorney, I would think so.
Yeah, it's toast now. And anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back.
That's it. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here to Loomer in Northern California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Michael. I'd like to know how many people remember that during the Iraq War, at the very beginning, the very start of it, that there's the pipeline that is in Iraq. It runs through Iraq to some pretty remote locations, in through Syria, and then it ends up going into that corner of Israel right there to the coast. And they dropped all kinds of special operations guys, but good friends of mine also, to secure the strategic locations on that pipeline so that the Iraqis couldn't destroy it. So there you go again. There's the pipeline that it's all in support of Israel.
Yeah, it is, because Israel was basically helping itself to all kinds of free oil and gas coming out of that pipeline. But I think that pipeline has stopped operating now, and that's why Israel is out there sucking out what's underneath the Golan Heights. But yes, those pipelines are considered strategic assets at the national level because that oil has to flow. It is the lifeblood of industry, and certainly it's what powers the war machine. You can't run an Abrams tank on solar cells. And so they have to have that. And the U.S. desire to control oil is also a desire to control conventional warfighting across the globe. Because if they can't get the gas for their war machines, then they can't fight back when they're invaded.
Oh, yep. And that pipeline, I guess, Yeah, it was put out of commission, but all the infrastructure's still there. I guess there hasn't been oil that flowed through that Iraqi pipeline that runs through all that territory for quite some time. But it wouldn't take much at all to get if the United States were to go in there, or some other power were to go in there and just completely overthrow the Iraqis and take over the oil fields, and they could fire that pipeline up in short order.
Well, you see, we already went in and overthrew the Iraq government, and the new Iraq government is asking us to leave. So that didn't work out all that well. Yes,
but, with you 100% there. Yeah, the Iraqis would not play ball as far as that pipeline goes. They and not only that, but at that time there, we didn't quite control Syria either. And so I think that it really came down to it that even if the United States somehow got that pipeline operating, that the Syrians probably would have cut it off as it flowed through their territory.
They very well could here. I mean, one of the reasons for the war in Syria was Assad's refusal to allow a pipeline to be built that would allow Israel to send the oil and gas from under the Golan up to Europe. And, that's rather insulting. That's like, somebody, is stealing your property and asks for a ride to the pawn shop.
Great analogy. And that's all I have for you today, Michael. Have a great day and a great weekend.
All right. Thanks an awful lot here. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines for a while because I got a lot of news I got to get through. So let's go to Laura in Michigan. Aloha, Laura. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was very upset this morning because I didn't like the American soldiers' remains coming home draped with a UN flag. My father was in the Korean War, and when he had a military funeral, he got an American flag, not a UN flag. So how do you feel about that?
I think if these are American soldiers, they should be under the American flag, although the war in Korea was initiated by the United Nations Security Council. But it may simply be that until they can actually identify the remains, they don't know who was an American and who was from one of the other UN countries that went on in there. So that may be the reason for that. But absolutely, I think a returning American veteran deserves the American flag.
That's right. That's right. I just wanted to spout off because I was very upset about that this morning.
Yeah, I can understand why you would be.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're closing the lines for a while. We may reopen them again in hour number 3 when the Lady Claire is here. So, NBC and Wall Street Journal did a poll, and it's bad news for the Democrats. Apparently, with party leaders like Maxine Waters pushing violence and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez pushing socialism and totally wide open borders, Americans are turning away from the radical far left party. And according to this poll, only 33% of those surveyed think the Democratic Party is in the mainstream of American thought. Just 33%. Now that is something like a 12% drop just in 2 years. So we're watching the Democratic Party basically self-destruct. And one of the problems the Democrats have right now is they don't have any better leaders than Maxine Waters or Nancy Pelosi. The last head of the party, Obama, took his magic with him, and he's, partying it up with Jay-Z and Beyonce in Paris. And 2020 is still a long ways away, so nobody has really emerged around whom the party faithful can rally. And what leaders the party have are all ancient fossils. Nancy Pelosi is 78, Bernie Sanders is 76, Hillary Clinton is 70, the wannabe nominee for 2020, Elizabeth Warren, is 69, and the party's angriest member, Senator Chuck Schumer, is 67. There's no young blood that's come on in, which is why I keep saying if the Democratic Party had any real sense of where they're going, they'd be looking at Tulsi Gabbard. Now, I don't agree with her position on gun control, but I'm very impressed with her in all the other areas. Now, there was a video. Somebody actually got us on video. I don't know what the obsession is with Donald Trump's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but apparently there was this U.S. Marine who was a Trump supporter, was wearing a Trump shirt, and he got jumped by a group of thugs. And apparently the melee started. One of the thugs addressed the soldier by calling him the N-word. And it just escalated from there. I can say the N-word if I want to, bro. You don't get to tell me what to do. If I want to talk and use the word, I use, then F you. And then the agitator taunted the Marine by claiming he's rolling deep, which is street slang for I got a lot of people behind me. So you're just going to have to deal with that. Now, the Marine told the thug to get out of his face, and that's when the altercation went physical. However, to no surprise, the Marine held his own and fended off multiple simultaneous attackers to the applause of the surrounding crowd, many of whom were shouting, "You got to respect this guy, he's a Marine." But it's another example that the far left is just willing to go to violence to get their ends. It's a very dangerous situation. Apparently, there was a second camera, video camera there, high end, that was filming the altercation. One of the thugs attacked the cameraman with a karate kick, and they stole the camera, $3,000 camera. So, it's violence. It's brown shirt tactics. And this is what's turning off the American mainstream to the Democratic Party. That kind of violence, pushing a political agenda, is simply un-American, especially when the agenda is men using the women's ladies' room, wide open borders, free stuff for illegal immigrants, and so forth. All right, let's take a phone call. Oh, I thought we'd shut the lines. Robert in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Mike. What's on my mind is that I believe all of the positive news about the economy is overcooked and it's underdone.
Yes, I agree.
think that the reason that the announcement that there is no wage growth is because there are not more people qualified to take the more jobs that are supposed to exist. There are less jobs than the qualified workers available. That's why there's no wage growth, because the workers are still competing against one another for jobs instead of against the employer.
Okay.
Because there's just not more. There's not more jobs, and you've got you're only using right now 64% of the available workforce. 37% are able-bodied unemployed people.
That's true. And then, of course, you have the flood of refugees and illegal immigrants who are being brought into the country, who are working, in many cases, illegally, paid under the table, in jobs that should be going to legal American citizens. It's an absolute disaster in the making. And yes, that all goes back to, again, this democratic obsession with open borders and the end of nation states and the end of citizenship.
But with 37% of the available workforce out of work or not working, you're losing that productivity to count towards your GDP growth, and it's productivity that'll never be recovered once it's lost.
You're absolutely right about that.
I think there'll be an adjustment in a month or so of the 4.1%, and then everybody will get another look at the real GDP.
Yeah, we see this all the time. They'll come out with some really good numbers, and the news media will proclaim it. And then down the road, they'll say, well, we've had to revise those numbers from, 2 quarters ago, when it's most people are beyond caring at that point. But, when you've got about 1/3 of the workforce not working, they're not paying taxes. They don't have money to pour into the consumer economy. There's a serious disconnect between the labor participation rate and the claims that the economy is doing great. And as I said earlier in the show, we should assume that Donald Trump's administration is cooking the books the way previous administrations did, because if Trump were to come on in and say the honest reality is the economy's in serious trouble, the Democrats would say, oh, see, Trump has ruined the economy. We had it in really good shape here, and Trump has ruined it all.
Quite right. Thank you, Mike. Have a great weekend.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're going to leave the lines closed. We are going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining our network. So let's talk about the economic news a little bit here. The so-called tech rally is starting to get thin, and this was starting to happen even before the major Facebook stock drop. And a big part of it has to do with the fact that, again, the prices for high-tech little gizmos are going up, and consumers just do not have the money to be constantly buying a newer and more up-to-date hip device. Plus the fact that a lot of this stuff has plateaued. When the first iPhone came along, it was a revolution compared to its predecessors. But the iPhone 10 is only marginally better than the iPhone 8. At a huge cost increase. And that facial scanner, I guess they're still having problems getting that thing to work. Now, General Motors, Fiat Chrysler, and Ford are all showing serious trouble. Back at the end of May, General Motors shares were at $38 when it announced that SoftBank, the Japanese company, would invest $2.25 billion in GM's self-driving car unit, Cruise. And by June, GM shares had gone up to $45, but this morning they're back down to $37.16. That's a 17% plunge from June 11th. Now, Fiat Chrysler didn't help. Wednesday morning it announced earnings and slashed full-year earnings guidance by about 7%. Their shares dropped by 13%. Ford's turn to confess came on Wednesday evening. Its second quarter earnings plunged nearly 50% to $1.1 billion. Total revenues fell 2.4% to $38 billion. Now, it sounds like a lot of money, but for a corporation that size, that is very, very serious reductions. It slashed its projections for the full year by about 11%, and they've announced yet another restructuring program that could drag out for 3 to 5 years and cost $11 billion. And anytime they use the word restructuring, that means that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. Now, Deutsche Bank is continuing to fail. They're in serious trouble. They're getting ready to lay off 10,000 employees. And they've been downgraded by Standard & Poor's from A- to BBB+. And it could be the signal of a major banking crisis on the horizon, because the truth is all of the banks are insolvent right now. And Deutsche Bank is actually doing better than a lot of them when it comes to the cash to deposit ratio. But Deutsche Bank, due to its size and quickly falling share price, could be the first domino to fall as the banking system starts to come apart at the seams. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about how Facebook stock fell dramatically from all the scandals, the concerns over privacy issues with Cambridge Analytica, coupled with the revelation that, yes, indeed, Facebook is actively practicing censorship. And following the story by Vice News that documented that Twitter was doing exactly the same thing, Twitter shares dropped by almost 19%. The company had to report lower than anticipated user numbers because people are turning away from these companies because they don't like censorship, they don't like being spied on. So by pushing the liberal agenda, these companies have really, really paid a price. Now, Iran is getting ready to launch their own national cryptocurrency in order to evade U.S. sanctions. Nobody thought for a minute they were just going to sit there and let the U.S. sanction them. They're looking for workarounds. A lot of other countries are saying they're not going to go along with the U.S. sanctions. They're sick and tired of sanctions. The U.S. has been flinging sanctions at other countries for years now that usually cause a lot more harm to other countries than to the targeted country. Look at when they first started sanctions against Russia, and it harmed a lot of people in Europe here. So Iran is saying their cryptocurrency would facilitate the transfer of money to and from anywhere in the world, and it will help during a time of sanctions. Meanwhile, a group of 10 Republican senators have issued a joint letter warning that if Europe ignores the U.S. sanctions against Iran, there will be trouble. We will do something. We will pass bad laws. I think the U.S. is probably being seen as a global bully right about now here. Down in Mexico, Mexico has decided that they don't want to deal with the United States anymore over the escalating trade spat. They're now buying their wheat from Russia. Over in China, their gold reserves appear to be slowly rising. We know that Russia is buying gold like crazy. These countries are getting ready for a collapse of the fiat paper monetary system, which does seem to be happening right now. Meanwhile, here in the United States, we have states that are drowning in irretrievable debt. One of them is Connecticut, which is seen as one of the richest states in the country, but it's got a debt of more than $53 billion. And you have California, Illinois, New Jersey, and New York are unable to make pension payments to retired government workers. In Illinois, vendors wait months to be paid by a government that's $30 billion in debt, and one of whose bonds is just one notch above junk status. New York is more than $356 billion in debt. New Jersey, more than $104 billion. California, more than $428 billion. Gee, I wonder how much of that debt was run up having to take care of all those illegal immigrants. Now, here is a very interesting story. This is from Conservative Daily News. Apparently, 8 blue states skimmed nearly $150 million from Medicaid payments to caregivers in 2017 to cover the workers' agency fees and dues to labor unions. California, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington deducted the money from healthcare workers' paychecks for overseeing the elderly and disabled. In many cases, the workers were forced to pay dues to unions without the workers' approval. Now, back in 2014, there was a Supreme Court ruling in Harris versus Quinn that said the state practice of skimming wages from Medicaid workers without approval was unconstitutional. But the states and unions have worked together to pass new laws and processes to keep the thing going. Because, as you know, the unions are very pro-democratic. Now, we've touched on this topic before, but it's worth mentioning again. Those safe deposit boxes at the bank may not be all that safe. And apparently, there's this woman, Susan Nomi, said she went to open her Bank of America safe deposit box, which she's had for 16 years. The entire box was gone. That's where she kept her family's jewelry and her dad's coin collection. And Bank of America can't explain where her valuables went. They don't have an answer. They just said, well, thanks for letting us know. And Nomi was a Bank of America employee of 40 years, and she's not the only one. Others have complained that Bank of America drilled their safe deposit boxes without permission or notice. Apparently, one family reported getting their safe deposit contents mailed to them, but claimed $17,000 in jewelry was missing. Others are out there saying, I just got robbed by the bank. Now, federal rules say banks can drill a box without permission only when there's a court order, a search warrant, delinquent rental fees, requests from estate administrators, or if the bank is closing a branch. However, none of these reasons apply to any of these cases. Now, federal law requires that banks give customers adequate notice before anything is done to their safe deposit box. So what is going on over at Bank of America? Okay, now, over in Europe, things are heating up. Hungary's Viktor Orban is basically warning the EU executive, Juncker, saying that its days are numbered with this ongoing row with the bloc over migration. The member states of the EU have really had it. Now, many of the governments of the member states are still on board with this George Soros, open borders, New World Order idea. But the ordinary people of Europe, are really, really fed up. Now, over in Austria, there was an interesting little case where 17 anti-immigration activists were charged with hate speech charges and criminal organization charges normally reserved for the mafia. But after they went to court, the judge freed them. Because in Austria, you do have a right to say, I think the open borders are a bad idea. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Again, going back to Austria, the new chief of staff of the Austrian army, Major General Robert Brieger, has warned that the greatest threat to Austria is uncontrolled mass migration. And he said, due to the lack of concrete border protection on the external borders of the European Union, all member states faced a threat from mass migration, including the possibility of future terrorist attacks. And he said, it's reached such a point that there's a need to act at a national level. In other words, they're bringing back national borders. So the European Union, the people in the European Union, they've got all the bad things of being in the EU, and all the good things, bit by bit, have been taken away. Schengen is basically effectively dead. Now, every year, Germany holds what they call an anti-racist soccer tournament. And this year, it had to be canceled because violence broke out during the final, with players from these two refugee teams starting a massive brawl. And one of the teams was Arab and the other African. And eyewitnesses said violence erupted during the match after an argument between players from the Red Tree team, the organizers behind which say they fight Nazis, while seeking to make Zwickau cosmopolitan, tolerant, and courageous, and from the Antifa soccer club, Marienthal United 08's refugee squad. So yeah, that open borders, bring everybody in and mix them all together, that's working out really, really, really good. Over in Sweden, a girl at a Swedish school was threatened with rape and called a slut because she wasn't dressed like a Muslim. And she was exposed to all kinds of gross harassment by other students at the Johannes School in Malmö. And the harassment included having her trousers pulled down and being screamed at she wasn't Muslim enough. Now, the girl is going to receive a 2,000 euro settlement for damages. But apparently, children at this school, some as young as 6 years old, are being beaten and sexually harassed during school hours. So yeah, how's that open borders thing working out for you? Down in Great Britain, Boris Johnson is once again tearing into Theresa May's Brexit plan, calling it vassalage, satrapy, and colony status for the UK. And we're seeing all these efforts to delay and to come up with a soft Brexit deal. The latest variation of the soft Brexit deal was that Great Britain would stay connected to the common market. They would still have their economy linked with the European economy. It's a Brexit in name only, which is what Theresa May seems to be headed for, because she's actually a Remainer. I think the British people are getting tired of waiting. They've expressed their will. They want out. They want the borders closed. And governments that don't listen to what the people want inevitably come to a sticky end. Here in the United States, Democratic Representative Joe Crowley is now out there suggesting families who cross the border illegally be financially compensated. In other words, he's offering out yet another financial incentive for people to violate our borders. Just say, yeah, well, come on in, we'll take some tax money over here that should have gone to fixing our roads, and we're going to start giving things to the families who cross the border illegally. I have a somewhat different take. Families that cross the border illegally should be immediately sent back. And if they'd been doing that all along, we wouldn't have had this mess with all the children being separated from their parents. It should be pretty much ironclad. If you have the paperwork to be coming into the United States of America, visa, green card, whatever, come across the border. If you don't have the documents, you stop at the border. And we have to cut off these financial incentives. Now, the University of Alaska Southeast is going to be canceling classes this fall to hold a Power and Privilege Symposium. This will be a third year in a row that UAS has shut down classes in its Janau campus for this conference. Students will be discussing issues like race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, age, religion, body size, ability, mental illness, class, and their intersectionalities. And I'm just wondering, what kind of a job are these kids going to be prepared for when they finally graduate? That's what I would really like to know. By the way, if you're a goldfish fan, and by that I mean the crackers, not the real fish, the crackers, there's been a recall of the goldfish crackers due to salmonella. And it's 4 specific flavors: flavor blasted extra cheddar, flavor blasted sour cream and onion, goldfish baked with whole grain extra cheddar, and goldfish mixed extra cheddar and pretzel. Pepperidge Farm is saying there have been no reports of illness, but they're doing the recall out of an abundance of caution. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I try and stay away from that Mandalay Bay shooting, but it just gets weirder and weirder between the MGM lawsuit against the victims to try and prevent there being any lawsuits against MGM, which would require discovery, turning over internal information, to this latest one. IntelliHub is reporting that newly released officer-worn body camera video footage from the night of the shooting reveals, and this is coming from the Mr. Burgundy YouTube channel, reveals that Stephen Paddock was killed by SWAT, and he did not kill himself with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, as the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department said he did, followed by the corporate media. So once again, what we're getting from the official sources isn't real. It's something else. Okay, so let's start talking a little bit here about computers. Once again, there's more snoopware out there. Apparently, this one's been installed by 11 million iOS, Android, and Chrome and Firefox users. And basically, people use ad blockers, disk cleaners, and other utilities to stop online trackers. Researchers have uncovered a host of apps and browser extensions that actually keep a list of every website ever visited and send it to servers operated by the developers, apparently with a unique identifying number that is generated at the time of the install. The snooping wares affect both the Android and iOS users, as well as those who installed Google Chrome and Mozilla file extensions. So it really is out of control here. Now, over at Twitter, it's been determined that, yes, indeed, there was a liberal bias there. Conservative tweets were being blocked, liberal tweets were not. Twitter is trying to claim it was simply a glitch, which doesn't make sense. Why would a glitch only target conservatives here? But if you think about it, Twitter is interfering in the election process by doing this. They're not allowing a dialogue among the American people to make decisions going into the midterm elections this November. They're only allowing one voice to be heard. That's tinkering with the elections, tampering with the elections. Now, apparently, Trump himself turned out to be censored as well. Twitter is using an algorithm to prevent his tweets from going viral. They're throttling his likes. And that apparently got the attention of Donald Trump himself because he's blasted Twitter, using Twitter, saying stop shadow banning or else. He's saying he's ready to go to Congress and get laws passed to return a balance to all social media, which I think would be a really good idea. And they're going to have to do it in the very, very near future before the politicking for November really starts to crank up. And I'm very much in favor of this. Meanwhile, over at Facebook, they're dealing with a lot more issues than the loss of stock price. Apparently, there are lawsuits piling up with potential settlements in the tens of billions of dollars. And the Facebook is facing massive fines, possible government intervention. Facebook is accused of using ad tools to discriminate against older job seekers. That's a lawsuit there. Apparently, federal judge has given a go-ahead for a $30 billion Facebook privacy class action lawsuit. And anybody with a Facebook account is a member of that class. Now, the lawsuit was actually filed all the way back in Chicago in 2015 and has been moved to a federal court in San Francisco. And the lawsuit accuses Facebook of violating Illinois Biometric Information Privacy Act. So that's another lawsuit out there. Now, Facebook has been slapped with $3.9 billion in lawsuits on the very first day of GDPR. And there's yet another lawsuit, a class action, where Facebook was logging users' texts and call logs on their smartphone app. So it's really out there, and I can understand why people are leaving Facebook, and I can understand why young people just getting onto the internet, they're very reluctant to sign on up. In fact, there's been a noticeable drop in new signups from the younger ages. Yet another lawsuit has to do with this personality quiz lawsuit that involves Cambridge Analytica. Cases seeking more than $1,000 per violation for Facebook's Cambridge Analytica privacy breach. I think Mr. Zuckerberg is about to have a lesson in how to be humble. And of course, there is the China problem. Facebook is facing sanctions in China. So they're in a lot of trouble right now. Somebody actually ran an online poll. How long before Facebook is as dead as MySpace? And 50% of the respondents said within 5 years. 26% of the respondents said within a year. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Anthony in Tucson, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I was trying to get it into, I forget what her name was, the first name was, but her last name I think was Stanton. And I was explaining to him, there was a case fought in Minnesota against the Federal Reserve Bank system that they did not lend substance and that the party did not have to pay the interest or the loan.
Yeah,
and I believe it was a fellow by the name of Daley, and it never was appealed. And the real fault with the Federal Reserve System is they are allowed to print this money out of thin air. They're allowed to lend it to other countries, and with that worthless paper, they're allowed to come and buy up all of the products that are produced here in the United States without paying for it. And even the buildings, when they build them, they loan the money for the high-rises or subdivisions or building projects. All of that is built with no money, and that's what that case was over. That there was no substance.
I was trying to find it here, And I remember that. We talked about it once before, but let me just summarize from memory here. Basically what it was, there was this guy who had gotten a mortgage from a bank, bought a house with it, gotten behind on his payments. The bank sued to foreclose. And the homeowner and his lawyer went into court and argued that basically the bank had not actually provided anything of tangible value. They had simply written some zeros into his account. And it was a phantom, and argued that because nothing of real value was offered in exchange for this mortgage pledge, that it didn't represent a legal contract. And the judge actually agreed and blocked the foreclosure. And of course, this did not get reported in the corporate media because it would undermine the entire mortgage banking industry. But what's really interesting is that the lawyer for the homeowner was disbarred immediately after that, and the judge died in a mysterious fishing accident shortly after that.
I say that I don't think that was appealed, and that ruling stands.
No, it's never. They don't want to let it go back to court because they couldn't. They couldn't appeal it. They've got no basis for appeal. The guy was right. The banks are not actually loaning you money. You don't get a bag of gold coins or silver coins or anything like that. It's just numbers in a ledger. It amounts to little more than getting the bank's permission to own a home in exchange for a lifetime of servitude toward them. That's where the word mortgage comes from. Gage is another word for a pledge or promise, and mort means obviously your life or death. So a mortgage is a promise that is binding until death, although these days it's usually 30 years. It really is, it's a fraud. It's a scam. Jesse James was right. The real outlaws are the bankers.
What it was, though, the framers put in the Federalist Papers no paper money ever because it did not represent life forfeiture, whereas with gold or silver or even copper or lead, these could all be basis for money because it takes life forfeiture to extract it from the ground.
Well, you have to remember the American Revolution was fought over the Bank of England's use of paper notes. And so the Founding Fathers set up an economy that was based on units of value. And in fact, everything that the Federal Reserve does today, in fact, banks with fractional reserve banking and everything would have been a death penalty offense under the Coinage Act of 1792.
Yes. Right. Well, and then they came up with a Social Security, which is another Ponzi pyramid scam. It started out at 1/3 of a penny on a dollar, and every time they raised it 1/3 of a penny, they raised it 100%. They were given $60 a month at that time. Now I think they're given $1,500, but they've raised the cost of Social Security 6,700%.
Well, Social Security is in serious trouble because presidents, mostly Bill Clinton, have been siphoning off the cash surplus that was built up for the baby boomer retirements. That's where Bill Clinton got his magic federal budget surplus that the Democrats like to keep pointing at. But he got it by embezzling the American worker. And that's why today they're saying Social Security is going to run out of money, because the money that was put in there to cover the baby boomer retirements is now gone.
I don't think it'll ever run out. They'll just raise the withholdings from the fools that buy into it, because if they really wanted to give somebody a social program, they should have allowed even the banks, if they were federally insured, to have that money deposited in a bank that actually was dealing in gold and silver, but it would earn interest. And if they did that, when I computed it at the university, on a $10,000 salary for 45 years, and I compounded the interest every year on it, it came to $14 million per person. I have a printout on that if you'd like to have
Well,
it.
Social Security was originally set on up with the idea that the American people would entrust their money to the government, who would then pool it together and invest it for them and generate a rate of return, and which would then fund Social Security to provide a comfortable retirement for them. And in theory, it sounds like a good idea. But over the years, the Social Security Trust Fund has been used to invest, if you will, in various pork barrel projects that went nowhere. One bad investment after the other after the other. And then again, they kept raising the Social Security taxes. And they did it especially anticipating the baby boomer retirements. And now that money is gone because of the Clinton administration. And the problem right now is we have a very large population of baby boomers, but a very small population of young workers, and especially in an age of depressed wages and salaries, they really can't make it balance out. Is going to be the issue. And plus, you've got Americans who are just saying, we're already taxed so much. We're being taxed a huge amount of money, and we're not getting back what we were promised.
They murdered 75 million innocent lost children that could have paid into the Social Security Fund, and they only got $300 to do it.
I'm sorry, I missed that last part.
They through abortion, since Roe versus Wade.
All right.
They killed off 1/8 of the American population that could have supported Social Security, and said they only got $300 to kill it. They would have made $14 million off each one if they let it live.
Well, whenever the government gets involved in our lives, it's usually good for the government and bad for our lives. And that's why they keep on doing it. Now they're telling us what vaccines we have to have and what foods we can and cannot eat. It's all about control, and they use that control to enrich themselves at our expense. Anyway, Anthony, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Coming up here on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. Now, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, they put up a weather satellite, cost $350 million, and it was supposed to be up there for 20 years. It's only been up there a few months. And NOAA is saying they think it's permanently broken. And apparently the issue is that the cooling system in the satellite is not working to keep the temperatures down during the warmer part of its orbit, meaning the daytime side. And so a lot of the instruments and channels just aren't working. Now that's bad engineering. That is definitely bad engineering to not have that. It's, again, a typical government job here. These are the same people who insist humans are warming the planet and need to pay a carbon tax. Now, there's a very interesting story that came out of Europe, and it has to do with copyright. And the idea of copyright does get abused, and this is a classic example of that. Apparently, a Dutch court asked the European Court of Justice to rule on a dispute between two cheesemakers. Lavola Hangelo took legal action against rival Smilt Foods for making a spreadable cheese called Wit, Wievenkaas, with the same taste as Lavola's Hexnakaas. And so she basically claimed it was copyright infringement. However, the legal opinion given to the court said EU copyright law does not extend to the taste of food. I mean, how would you even begin to copyright that? I mean, when you copyright a recording or a video or a screenplay or a book, you send them a copy. What are you going to do? Send a bit of cheese? Taste is still something that's actually very hard to quantify, which is why artificial flavorings are never as good as the real natural ones. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And one of our members just posted a story at whatreallyhappened.com, promoted it to the front page. There is another product recall out there, And apparently this one involves the Hungry Man frozen dinners, also recalled for salmonella contamination. I also noticed this last week. There were a whole bunch of stories all over the corporate media about having backyard chickens was a problem because they were all infected with salmonella. And I was wondering if this was just trying to get people to give up producing their own food and go back to the supermarkets or not. But apparently with all this other salmonella concern over there, there is another issue. Or it could be corporate sabotage. There's a lot of that stuff going on here. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson did a segment talking about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau dealing with his own illegal immigration crisis. And border crossers are clogging the asylum system and flooding the homeless shelters. So Trudeau has a new solution. They're going to put all these illegals into hotels. They're going to be living in hotels at public expense. Ooh, that's going to make Trudeau really popular next election. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, this Trudeau is just such a... I'm just so angry. Every time I learn something more about what's going on. You either have to be a complete idiot to be allowed to be in high politics like George Bush or Trudeau, or you have to be compromised and like be a hardcore criminal. So Trudeau, I'm pretty sure, is in the idiot category. Oh, man. Anyway, I wanted to smear the TED Talks.
Yes.
And I had watched a professor give a talk on perspective and optical illusions. And so the professor showed a rectangle on the computer screen, and then he rotated it 90 degrees from vertical to horizontal. The proportions of the rectangle looked like they changed. And then I was convinced that it was too much of an optical illusion, so I actually took a tape measure and went and measured my monitor and realized that it is changed. It doesn't just look like it's changed, it is changed. So I just made a comment about that he doesn't have his pixel resolutions, oriented properly on his projector screen. So he's teaching everybody that this is an optical illusion when really it's actually just
it's the pixel aspect ratio.
Image.
Yeah.
And so I get deleted and banned. I tried a few other times, made a different account, and a couple of other intelligent comments on something, and no. So you're banned. I should have been promoting pedophilia, I guess, and denouncing and promoting GMOs and pedophilia, and I would be like a 5-star user, I guess.
It would be promoting pedophilia and denouncing GMOs, because we talked about this earlier in the week, where TED Talk literally had a video of this professor up there trying to normalize pedophilia and say that, it's just part of nature and we shouldn't be hard on people who molest little children. But TED Talk has a permanent ban on anything critical of GMO. Okay, now there's the music.
Okay,
Mateus, I got to let you go. And we'll be right back with the lovely Lady
bye.
Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The lovely Lady Claire has been a little bit delayed. She was on a phone call regarding her music, and her music trumps what really happened. So she'll be in here in... okay, she says she's on her way. Okay. Well, that's okay, but it was good news. So, yeah, let's have that. Meanwhile, while she gets settled in, I'm going to take a phone call here from Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. In reference with what Mateus said, in Ontario, we just had an election and we elected a conservative government. And Doug Ford is cutting, and he's cutting hard. He wants to cut the city councillors of Toronto from 45 to 25, which represents $10 billion. And that's for less than half of the population of California. We're almost bankrupt. And the Liberals doubled that debt. They doubled it.
Yes.
They doubled about $140 billion debt in 12 years. And you know what we got to show for it? Nothing.
Well,
absolutely nothing.
Liberals do that all over. They love to spend money because they build their power base by offering all kinds of free stuff. It's bread and circuses until they run out of other people's money.
And you and I both know that it's not free because someone always pays.
That's true.
And it's the people that work, and they're grinding away. And, you know, they don't understand. There's a very, very, very simple concept with free market economics. Every penny that goes to the government to either waste or to service debt is one less penny that's actually going into the economy to grow it.
Yes.
It's not hard to understand that. So
No,
I appreciate your time, Mike.
Well, I appreciate the phone call, and again, the liberals, at least in this country, the liberals' only remaining promise they've got out there is vote for us, and we'll take stuff away from the Republicans and give it to all of you. That's it. Like I said, it's bread and circuses. All right, Al, thank you for the call. Thank you for the call. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the phone line so that the Lady Claire can get her turn at the microphone. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Thanks for taking my call, and give my regards to Claire. I have a quick comment. I've been watching your program for a long time, and these past few weeks or months, you keep comparing if they take out Trump, it's going to be like a JFK type effect. Well, this is the way I see it. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, that the JFK assassination, that was definitely a mafia hit. It was right in the open, right in front of everybody.
Yep.
Everybody could see. That was definitely organized crime. The way they're going to take out Donald Trump, and God forgive, God forgive me for saying this, but I hope God protects him. They're going to take him out the way they took out the Pope. That Pope, they're going to give him maybe a poison tea or a poison cup of coffee, and he's going to die in his sleep. What do you think?
It's entirely possible, and you're right. The hit on JFK, the mafia were part of it. They weren't the only ones out there, but they could take out Trump in a variety of ways. They could claim Air Force One crashed, but and it was shot down by a Russian Buk missile or something. But it really concerns me that we're seeing all of these people and hearing all these people out there talking about wanting Trump to be dead and wanting to kill him, and it's just everywhere. And that's why I wondered if it was a campaign to desensitize us to the issue, so that we don't react in shock and outrage the way we did when JFK was killed.
Okay.
So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And now, for those of you watching on YouTube, the gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. And Lady Claire, what have you got that you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing comes to us from It's the Fan by Matt Slavo. And the article is by Daisy Luther, someone for whom I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration. But the way that she kind of posited one of her issues about things that could really take down the U.S. economy, I have some issues with. And she said in her opening statement that there are 3 events happening in the economy right now that could cause the prices of everything, from food to materials to make replacement parts for your car, skyrocket. But if we're looking at them all together, we could be facing a perfect storm of economic havoc. And this is what I take exception to. Iran is blocking oil exports from Saudi Arabia. That's exactly the way that she described it. And Mike,
okay, yeah, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates rejoining the network. Well, Iran is not yet blocking oil exports.
No, and I want to go into that a little bit.
All right.
Okay.
My mistake. I jumped the gun.
A little bit, yeah. We've got a trade war that is getting more heated every day. Now, there was some sort of a rapprochement with the EU yesterday in Juncker, but it's hard to know exactly what that was because it was kind of full of nebulousness and not a lot of solid stuff.
Well, basically, the deal was all the tariffs are going to go to zero, but there were conditions that the EU had to commit to buying more American products, primarily agricultural.
Yeah,
so it achieved the same ends as a tariff war would, but without the tariff war and the cost to the end consumer. The one exception, of course, to that agreement, of course, being automobiles.
Right, right. And President Trump has slapped tariffs on products from China, Canada, and he's opened the door to our exports also being subject to tariffs. Now, I agree with Daisy about these issues as being potentials for putting our economy and lives out of whack, and very quickly. What she does not mention, however, is the relentless 3-year U.S.-enabled Saudi genocide of Yemen, where innocent people are being killed by Saudi military through direct airstrikes, starvation, and potentially weaponized cholera, which is sweeping the country. The Houthis have not attacked Saudi oil vessels for absolutely no doggone good reason. And as much as I hate violence and I condemn it, I can almost understand the fury that drove the Yemeni to these attacks, Mike.
Well, I certainly can as well. But again, Saudi Arabia is still getting their oil out because they just turn north and go on out the Suez Canal.
Right, right. So I'm hoping that we don't have a perfect storm of a of a configuration of all those three coming together. And I'd also like to talk about the fact that radioactive particles from Fukushima nuclear disaster have been found in California wine.
That's it. I'm going back to vodka.
Okay. All right. Fine. And there have been a lot of tests, and apparently there's a new one that was published in the journal Arctic, suggesting that currents and atmospheric patterns carried radioactive particles across the Pacific, where they settled on grapevines growing in California wine country, and that bottles produced during the following years contained increased levels of cesium-137, with the Cabernet revealing double the amount of pre-Fukushima radiation. Now, these wines are from one year to another, and it's up there at the article. If you are a wine drinker, look for the dates when the wine was processed, and if it comes from one of those dates, don't buy it. Probably a good idea.
I would say definitely yes. Mm-hmm. Now, again, there's always a little radiation around you. We live on an extinct volcano. There's natural radiation coming out of the solidified lava. But Fukushima did dump a lot of radiation that is transportable. And it was only a matter of time before the ocean currents and wind currents did spread it over to the west coast of Canada and the United States, and Claire and I have stopped eating any sushi that is locally produced, and a lot of the sushi places have now had to go to the extreme measure of flying in fish from off the coast of South America. But sooner or later it'll be down there as well. It's a mess, and they're not going to be able to fix it, and they're still dumping the radioactive water into the ocean because they don't know what else to do.
Also, again from Zero Hedge, which is it's a site that I recommend to you. I don't necessarily agree with everything Tyler Durden says, who is the webmaster over there, but I have a great deal of respect for him. And this article appeared there. Americans' intentions to buy a car collapse as high rates crush home buying plans. And apparently, the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment slumped to a 6-month low in June despite surging economic growth, which Trump was touting very much today.
Well, again, I'm not sure we should trust those numbers. I'm not assuming that Trump is any more honest with the economic numbers than his predecessors, especially because those numbers don't line up with the labor participation rate.
No, they don't. They don't at all.
Again, if the economy were really doing better, we would see it reflected in consumer spending patterns. It's simply not there.
People just don't have the money.
Nope.
They don't. And more people who were worried about the outcome of the tariffs that the U.S. has seemed to slap on everyone, and negative expectations could quickly disappear if the trade issues with Europe are promptly settled. Well, they were, and immediately followed by agreements with China, Canada, and Mexico.
Well, Mexico is acting like they're not expecting there to be anything to be settled anytime soon. They've started buying their wheat from Russia.
Yes, I saw that article as well. And I thought this was, you have to appreciate the irony here. In a bizarre response, Twitter tells Trump it does not shadow ban while admitting it does. And apparently, this has been confirmed last week by the liberal publication Vice and promptly tweeted about by President Trump. Now, Twitter has issued an explanation to allegedly set the record straight, where they explicitly state that they do not engage in the practice, except then they describe how they do exactly just that. And Twitter says the best definition we've found is this: deliberately making someone's content undiscoverable to everyone except the person who posted it, unbeknownst to the original poster. And so, in other words, Twitter has said they don't shadow ban. It's just that tweets from people you follow may never actually appear unless you click directly into their timeline. Now, Mike, come on.
That's pretty Orwellian right
you
there.
You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, that's double speak here.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Trump has now realized that Twitter's been doing it to him.
Mm-hmm.
They've been throttling his likes. They have been using an algorithm to keep his tweets from going viral. And now he's basically on the warpath, and he's saying, you guys will stop it, or I'm going to get Congress to pass a law on this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Twitter at one point said this was just a glitch, while failing to explain why this glitch was only affecting conservative posters. But I think it would be a really good idea that Congress, as we head into the campaign season for November, that Congress does pass a law saying that online social media, which is now so critically important to the public debate over the issues, be required to be fair and balanced, because otherwise it's just a propaganda machine for the liberals.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking about this earlier, about the Australian report on impending U.S.-Iranian strikes.
Yes.
Well, Mattis has said, Secretary Mattis, it just ain't so. He described these reports as a complete fiction, and the Australian Broadcast Corporation report cited high-level defense and intelligence figures, and they told ABC they believe the U.S. is prepared to bomb Iran's nuclear capability, and perhaps most alarmingly, as early as next month.
Well, Mattis is out there basically saying it's nonsense. You can go back to sleep, Iran. Don't man the radars. Don't look out the window. Just go back to your prayers and sleep. And, we're not coming to get you.
And right now, and this is unfortunate because the American people have been so lied to by their political class. Right now, I would tend to believe the reports by Australian Broadcasting over what Mattis is saying. I believe, however, that they got their timing wrong. Now, Mike, the drop-dead date that President Trump has posited, by which none of the world should be buying Iranian oil, is 4 November. Why is this significant? This is the Sunday before the U.S. primaries, which occur Tuesday, 6 November. I think it is very highly likely for the Trump administration using Israeli intel to do some kind of definitive military action against Iran on either the 4th or the 5th of November to ensure that the GOP hangs on to their majority come Election Day. Mike?
I would say that they may be hoisting with their own petard.
Yeah.
The sentiment in this country is that we've been at too many wars for far too long, and Trump campaigned on ending all of these foreign interventions. And so I think it would be a bad mistake. What they may do is attack Iran the day after the midterm elections.
Okay. Why do you think rather than before?
Because, as I just explained, I think bombing Iran is going to enrage Trump's base, the GOP voters, and they may decide that they're going to vote for the Democrats, or they may just simply, out of disgust, stay home.
Not vote.
And not vote at all.
Yeah. I would like to talk a little more. I know you raised this, I think, in the second hour of the show, but it's this group of 10 Republican senators who have issued a joint letter to the ambassadors from Britain, France, and Germany saying they are troubled by European efforts to evade newly imposed U.S. sanctions against Iran. And I have to wonder, these 10 Republican senators, I wonder first if they're all high recipients of AIPAC money.
That's a safe assumption here.
And what are they going to do to every nation which refuses to go along with these sanctions?
They'll just hit them with more sanctions. They're weaponizing sanctions and throwing them around. Now, you need to understand, there's absolutely nothing in international law. There's no treaty obligation that obligates these nations to go along and respect U.S. sanctions. And we're seeing more and more nations are saying that shouldn't happen. Turkey is not going to go along with those. Germany is actually encouraging India to go on buying Iranian oil, and India is one of the major customers of it. So to me, the read is all of these sanctions and this bullying and chest thumping, it really is alienating the rest of the world. It's isolating the United States both economically and politically. It's very clear that these other nations do not appreciate the U.S. coming on in and just dictating to them, you will sanction Iran with us
or else.
I don't think they appreciate that at all. And I think the world is moving as quickly as possible to be able to conduct business without the United States. To simply say, we're not going to trade with the United States. We don't want to buy your products. They're overpriced junk anyway. We have nothing that we wish to sell to you. And that, of course, would bring down the U.S. economy.
And I would imagine that some countries are going to come up with very creative ways to not allow U.S. sanctions to impinge their buying of Iranian oil. Maybe some sort of cryptocurrency.
Well, Iran is launching one. Iran is launching a national cryptocurrency for just that purpose.
And this whole martial demonization of Iran, it's insane. I also hope, Mike, on this issue, that someone in the bowels of power in D.C. is asking themselves this question. What will Russia do in the case of a U.S.-Israeli attack against Iran? Will the Duma and Putin sit on their hands and sing Kumbaya? I don't think so. And the other question is, what about Turkey, which actually shares a common border of Iran, and the government of which has already stated it will absolutely not observe the U.S. boycott on Iranian oil? I sure hope someone in D.C. is losing some sleep over this, because I sure as heck am. It was not a tactic calculated to bring the Iranians to the negotiating table after President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the P5+1 agreement.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So let's talk about this coming war with Iran. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, it's no secret the U.S. has been trying to figure out some way they can take down Iran. They tried a regime change in 2009. We all remember that spectacle of John McCain dancing around the stage going, bomb, bomb, Iran, and laughing. Thought it was very, very funny here. Before the commercial break, of course, Claire was asking a valid question. What will Russia do? Because Russia has no intention of being pushed back. Right now, Russia is enjoying the fact that their influence in the entire Middle East is growing, even as the U.S. influence is fading.
Yeah, the Russians seem to be the adults in the room in the Middle East, and I understand that.
Putin's a statesman. Well, I think probably the Australian Broadcasting Corporation is probably a little closer to the truth than Mattis is letting on, that they're not going to try a full-on frontal war like they did in Syria because they just lost Syria, or they're on the verge of losing Syria. So I think it'll be more like the start of the Iraq War, where they're just going to haul off with a massive and rapid series of strikes. They're going to use the stealth aircraft. They're going to go after, well, they're claiming they're going after the nuclear sites, which means they're going to shower the Iranian people with any nuclear radiation that is in those facilities right now. And Iran is allowed to have those facilities under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I suspect the attack will also include Iran's missile sites, because obviously Iran, following an attack by the U.S. and Israel, will probably be launching missiles at Israel. They can't reach the United States, although they can reach United States bases in the Middle East. And Iran has just launched an additional missile production line, so that may be what they're thinking. But I think it's going to be a blitzkrieg, over and done with as fast as possible, with a diplomatic warning to Russia, if you come on in and spoil our party again, this time it will go nuclear.
Ouch.
So
seriously.
Yikes. Well, that's the use of the U.S. nukes. They haven't exploded one since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But every time negotiations get tough, there's always that implicit threat. You know, we hauled off and dropped 2 nuclear weapons on a country that was already trying to surrender to us. We can go ahead and do it again to you. But so again, it's a dangerous game of brinksmanship. But there are too many people who just, they have this group thing, we have to get Iran. Israel wants us to get Iran. We need Iran's oil to be sold for the US dollar. We need Iran enslaved to a private central bank. And they're all basically ganging up on Iran, which is the last major power in the region. It's not a small pushover country like Syria was. Iran is very, very capable. So is Saudi Arabia, but at least for the moment, Saudi Arabia is on the side of the United States, although they're burning up their stockpiles down there in Yemen. So I would be very concerned that there will be a sudden attack, and Mattis doesn't want Iran to know that it's coming. But I think anybody in Iran who's reading the American media can see all the signs. It's being talked about, it's being planned. They've had a policy meeting in the White House. Neither Iran nor Trump are going to back down from the belligerent tweets that they've been shouting, twittering at each other. And I agree with that Army colonel who was on Tucker Carlson the other night, saying that what the United States is probably going to do is a Gulf of Tonkin-like incident where they will sink a U.S. ship and blame Iran for it.
So you're looking for a false flag?
Yeah, I'm looking for a false flag here to kick this thing off. You know, Iran has attacked us, and they could even go to the extent of setting off a nuclear weapon someplace and claim this proves Iran had nuclear bombs all along. Be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. Because, as I said before, the American people, we're tired of war. We're tired of the cost of the war. We're tired of what the war is doing to our country in terms of neglect of our infrastructure. We're tired of all of our young people coming home from the war zones in metal boxes, in wheelchairs, on crutches. It's been going on for 17 years, longer than World War I and World War II put together.
I know.
And I think the American people are really tired of it. It's going to take something really massive to get Americans to hop back on the war wagon. Something greater than 9/11 even, because now we all know 9/11 was another false flag.
Right.
And so, but at this point, it does seem like the U.S. and Israel want that war in Iran, and nothing is going to stop them. So, your comment?
Yeah, it's and the other thing is, when I look at Iran and the Jewish community there, the Jewish community is doing just fine. They are not being persecuted.
No, they're not. Iran is not the new Nazi Germany, and their leadership are not Hitler. But Israel will not hesitate to write off the Jews in Iran in this coming war because they failed to emigrate to Israel when Israel demanded it. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I just want to insert a comment here. I'm really tired of all the robocalls. I get more marketing robocalls on this phone than any other kind of call here. And it's very angering because we've signed up for that do not call list, and it's simply not being
No, it doesn't exist anymore, dear.
We're just being flooded with advertisements everywhere that we go. It is way beyond control, and I find it annoying. For those of you on metered plans, it's costing you money. It absolutely is. Anyway, so we talked about this story a little earlier in the program today about how Israeli police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque, basically raided the mosque, actually went inside it.
Right.
And you had some additional things.
Yeah, I do. The reason this is significant, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is really an emblem of Palestinian statehood hopes and frequent catalyst of their conflict with Israel's. And medics in Gaza said that Israeli army gunfire killed 2 people, including a boy. Now, the police spokesman said the troopers were sent into the mosque after suspects had barricaded themselves in running confrontation in the surrounding compound, during which masked men launched firecrackers and handheld canisters. Now, there was no immediate word of any violence in the mosque, whose older male worshippers said they had been allowed to exit after being searched. And witnesses saw around 20 younger men detained by police and said that prayers would resume. Now, Abbas made a statement about this being the fuel to the fire to start another religious war. Unfortunately, looking at what the Israelis are doing, this is exactly what the Israelis want to see happen.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
And Abbas is drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yep.
But unfortunately, Israel's just going to keep up the provocations until finally Abbas is going to have to do something or risk losing the support of his own people around him.
Yeah. And he doesn't have a whole lot of choices. This next was in Global Research. Again, it's a blog to which I refer people because they do a good job on most of their stories, and I have a great deal of respect for them. And the headline read, Palestinian Truth-Telling Criminalized by Israel. And it goes on to say that Palestinian journalists daring to expose Israeli high crimes face extrajudicial arrest and imprisonment on the phony pretext of threatening national security. And apparently, Israeli violations against Palestinian media freedom are rampant.
Well, they're shooting the reporters down on the Gaza border.
And killing them.
Yep.
Yeah, and according to the Palestinian Center for Development and Media Freedoms, MATA, violations occur regularly, and there have been 62 reported in June alone, including by PA authorities acting as Israel's enforcer.
I told you PA was an Israeli puppet.
Oh, man. Earlier in July, Israel shut down Al-Quds TV, banning its operations and prohibiting journalists from working with it on the phony pretext of inciting terrorism, code language for truth-telling the Netanyahu regime wants suppressed. And MATA denounced what's going on, saying the latest assault comes within a systematic and aggravated Israeli policy to suppress media freedoms and silencing journalism in Palestine by all forms of assaults, particularly shutting down media institutions. Now, I have a little challenge for our readers and listeners. If the Israeli government and military are doing everything in an absolutely honorable and moral way with the Palestinians, why are they suppressing the reporting of it?
Is this a trick question?
The two are mutually exclusive. I'm sorry. You know, obviously Israel doesn't want the truth to get out there on these issues.
All of this is building support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
Yeah.
World opinion is turning against Israel, and to the point where politicians, leaders of other countries, are starting to feel the pressure from their own population, saying, you know, you've got to stop going along with Israel. They are behaving, you know, like a pirate kingdom or a rogue nation.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's amazing. The U.S. justified bombing Syria at one point, claiming Assad was killing his own people. Here you have Israel demonstrably just shooting the protesters, unarmed protesters in Gaza, and then clearing itself by saying the protesters simply walked into the path of an already fired bullet.
Yeah, I mean, hello.
Yeah.
And speaking into walking into a path of an already fired bullet, there is a teenage girl shot by Israeli soldiers, and she's going to be able to walk again. And I felt this was important. There are some Muslim charities who are really doing some incredible things to help Palestinians who've been hurt and maimed by Israeli fire. She's a teenager. She was shot by Israeli soldiers during an anti-occupation rally in Gaza. Miriam Abu Matar, who is 16 and lives in Gaza's Rafah city, was able to be brought to Istanbul for medical treatment.
I'm amazed that they were able to get her out of there because Israel's not allowing the wounded out, not even to go to the West Bank, which is why the Gaza hospitals, their only option is amputation.
Yeah, and since March, Abu Matar has been through 42 phases, count them folks, 42 phases of surgery provided by the Humanitarian Relief Foundation, IHH, on Thursday. Now, the kid's able to walk around with a walker, and her doctor, Mehmet Vali Karaltin, her surgeon, who identified her wound as severe, said that she will be able to walk again.
Without the walker, eventually,
walker.
yes.
And he was speaking to Anadolu Agency, which is a Turkish outlet, and the girl said, "I was targeted because I carried a Palestinian flag, and I will continue to struggle." Now, Mike, I've got to get my head around this. This 16-year-old kid was shot not because she attempted to hurt or injure any IDF member or throwing stones, but because she was carrying a Palestinian flag?
Oh, no. According to Israel's investigation, she just walked into an already fired bullet.
Right, right. And by the way, I have just fired off an email to the charity helping this young woman, asking if Americans can, without legal repercussions against them, contribute to this charity. And if so, I'm going to ask you, dear, to create a link at what really happened. Their website can be found at, and I think I should spell this out, and they do have an English version because I went there today, www.ih8.org.tr for Turkey, /. And, oh, they're doing it again, Trump and Kushner. They are preparing an economic plan as part of the Middle East peace proposal. A long-awaited plan from the Trump administration is including what the White House is calling a robust economic plan to help resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, an official said.
Well, basically what they're trying to do is, with Israel having starved the Palestinians to the edge of submission, Trump is going to hold out a carrot and say, we'll give you a bunch of money if you will give up this idea of a right to return and recognize the state of Israel.
And Trump...
It hasn't worked so far, by the way. I need to point that out.
Yeah, and Trump and Kushner are deeply and deliberately and horrifically awkwardly missing the point here. For the Palestinians, a peace deal is not about economic development. Had that been the case, Mike, the situation would have resolved itself long ago. The issue, as you have stated, is a viable homeland for the Palestinian people and a recognized state living in harmony and trading with Israel.
Well, the problem here is that to the Israelis, everything has a price.
Yeah.
We offer you enough money, you will do what we tell you. Certainly it's been working with AIPAC in the United States Congress.
Of course, yeah.
They're not used to dealing with issues of principle. And the Palestinians do not want to give up the idea of their own country because it was their country to begin with.
Yeah.
And they want to hang on to what's left of it. That's a perfectly reasonable situation there. And they don't want to have their history erased, which Israel is deliberately trying to do.
I know.
When Israel went into this last time in Gaza, they bombed a museum. They're trying to erase Palestine from the map completely. All the time screaming that it's Palestine that wants to erase Israel from the map.
Wow. Unless and until there can come a reasonable reconciliation here, we're going to see more incidents at the border. We're going to see more Palestinians killed. And it's just heartbreaking, Mike. It is.
The problem is Israel doesn't want reconciliation. They want all the land.
I know.
And this nation-state law is being looked at by a lot of people as a prelude to outright annexation of the entire West Bank and Gaza.
Absolutely.
And say, okay, it's all Israel now. There is no more Palestine, so sit down and shut the heck up.
Yeah. I'd like to pop over to Syria right now. And Syria's Assad said Russian military assistance is needed in Syria long term. And he said on Thursday that Russian forces were going to be needed for more than just fighting terrorism. And Russian armed forces are needed for balance in our region, at
Which
least.
is code speak for standing up to the American forces, which are staying in Syria, even though they have no legal basis to be there.
No. And so it's important and necessary. He did that with an interview with Interfax news agency. He added that Syria's agreement with Russia over the Hemam military base was signed to last 40 years, indicating that the relationship between the two countries was of a long-term nature. And what they were discussing between Russians and Syrians is the rapid return of refugees to Syria and how that can be facilitated. Mike, you know, al-Assad is absolutely correct on his assessment. He knows.
Well, al-Assad is no fool. He's known that the U.S. incursion into his country has always been about removing him and placing Syria under a puppet regime serving American interests.
Yep.
And you have to admire his courage and the courage of the Syrian people that they have basically, with the help of the Russians, succeeded in thwarting the American plan, which is one of the reasons why the United States is so angry with Russia right now. And it begs the question that if the United States goes into Iran, will Russia come in on Iran's side exactly the same way? Because Russia has already stated that if Iran is in fact attacked, they will come on in and they will render assistance to Iran. So again, we're courting a Russia-U.S. military confrontation, and that could spin completely out of control.
Absolutely. I'd like to also, speaking of the Middle East, bop over to Yemen, because apparently Yemen is on the brink of yet a new cholera epidemic. Thousands of people could be affected by a new wave of deadly cholera in the coming weeks. And the hot summer month conditions are ideal for cholera to be spreading rapidly. And apparently almost 3,000 suspected cholera cases were reported in the first week of July across the country. And it could absolutely overwhelm food insecure children and an already overcrippled health system, the charity's CEO, Heli Thornton-Schmidt, said.
Well, here's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, the Saudi coalition has been bombing the water supply system. Okay, which means people are having to obtain water from other places like puddles. And water that's potentially contaminated by sewage, which is the way cholera is transmitted naturally. But we should not rule out the possibility that this is a biological weapon. Because cholera has been used as a biological weapon before. When Japan invaded China, they were dropping cholera into all the water wells.
And the U.S. has used it as well in times past.
Yes.
So when one has developed a biological or chemical weapon, one is probably going to hang on to that and use it again.
Well, see, here's the thing.
Yeah.
The United States signed a treaty saying that all of these weapons were going to be destroyed. And the other countries that signed this treaty, they've pretty much already done it. The U.S. never did.
No, they didn't.
You know, they signed the treaty. They still have all these stockpiles of these very, very dangerous substances.
I'd also like to go to another article from Blacklisted News, again, a good resource. The Pentagon, CIA, and NSA are in charge, and it talks about how the U.S. Press can so often refer to high security countries like Pakistan and Egypt, and the same reporters and commentators are blind to the same phenomenon here in the U.S. You know, it's really kind of amazing. And I have found in recent years that it's very helpful to read both the U.S. independent media and the foreign press in English to even begin to get a small clue as to what the U.S. government and its security apparatus is doing and potentially why. And I would urge our listeners and readers, don't listen to what's coming out of the box with the talking prostitutes and warmongers. They are there to feed you lies. They are only telling you what the government has told them to tell you to avoid looking at what is really going on or why. The engineered news has been created to sell you an agenda which forwards the government's actions or positions on certain issues and avoid others. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself, why has nothing been stated by the prostitutes and warmongers about the U.S.-enabled Saudi war crimes in Yemen?
Because there's no positive hook that they can use. Yemen was never a threat to the United States. But by golly, Stormy Daniels got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, you know, and I've linked to some images. They are very disturbing. I understand they're disturbing. But folks, I put them in there because they were disturbing. And what I would love for all of Rivero's Rangers to do is to do this. Take the article, Find Who Your Congressional Representative Is. I sent a link so you can find out who allegedly represents you in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. Now, I would like you to ask them very politely, not in a confrontational way, just what is going on with Yemen, and when will U.S. support for Prince bin Salman's genocide against the Yemen people end? Let them know you know what is happening. Now, they're probably going to try to shout you down with a bill stating Congress aims to stop arming terrorists, limit Yemen war involvement in a funding bill. But then you need to ask them, how is this going to affect things on the ground, particularly in President Trump's reworking of the Conventional Arms Transfer Treaty, which he has done.
There's another issue you need to keep in mind.
Okay.
This war was not Saudi Arabia's idea. Saudi Arabia is working as a U.S. proxy, the same way that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were. This is a U.S. war.
Yeah.
But if you do contact your congressman, first of all, focus on those who are up for re-election in November.
Yes.
Direct your effort to them and say, if these wars are not stopped, this will be what I make my choice on this November.
Yeah.
And, the incumbents want to stay incumbents.
Okay.
And if enough people were to basically write on in and say, this has to stop, we might get their attention a little bit. But unfortunately, most of our government is locked up by Israel, and Israel wants wars on all of these countries, no matter how many of other people's lives or other people's money it takes.
Or other people's kids.
Yep.
Definitely. I'd like to probably tease this into the next segment because I think we're almost at a break right now.
Yes, we are. We're coming up here on our last commercial break on this Pauhana Friday. And when we come on back, we'll be closing out the show here.
Yeah.
And I see you've got a very interesting story there. So stay tuned. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Final segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, you have one more story.
Yes, I did. And this comes to us from antiwar.com. And again, another site that I would very much commend to you. And it's titled, Assange's Freedom, Democracy's Last Line of Defense. And it starts with a reference to a letter from the Birmingham jail addressing a struggle in the civil rights era. And Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." His message is now more current and prevalent than ever in the current political climate surrounding WikiLeaks and its founder, Julian Assange. And what WikiLeaks did was stepped into a global stage with release of a huge trove of classified documents revealing crimes and corruptions of government, and publication of war logs that exposed atrocities committed by U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. The reaction of the Pentagon quickly escalated into a war against the First Amendment. WikiLeaks was subjected to unlawful financial blockades, and therefore there has been an ongoing secret grand jury against the organization since 2010. That's 8 years. And now it looks like Assange is going to be booted out of the embassy in the UK and extradited to the US.
Well,
very soon.
Assange embarrassed the United States, and they want their revenge.
Yeah.
But again, the issue is he was acting as press. He himself did not reveal any secrets. They were revealed to him.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was legit. When his trial comes up, it is going to be a First Amendment issue.
Yeah. And I have something to say here. Mr. Assange is not my enemy, nor the enemy to the people of this country. He is someone who brought the dark machinations of the U.S.'s and other countries' deep states into the light where they could be seen for what they were. And for this, he will probably spend the rest of his life in jail if he is not assassinated first in some way that makes it look like an accident. And folks, I have something to tell you. When the telling of the honest truth becomes transmogrified into treason or espionage, the society in which that has happened has become a full-tilt dictatorship on steroids. George Orwell's novel 1984 was a cautionary tale, not a how-to manual. And I sure as heck hope that those in the bowels of power in this country, in whose hands now lies the fate of Julian Assange, remember this.
And I would like to ask all of our listeners, make a point of sending, going over to the White House comments site and saying Trump should issue a pardon.
Yeah.
Because Julian Assange ultimately didn't break any laws.
No.
The reason he took refuge in the Ecuador embassy was over this bogus sexual assault allegation, which has already been dropped.
Yeah.
And so Trump ought to basically just say, it's time to let him go. Now, technically, Trump can't issue a pardon until Assange is convicted of something, but there really is no case against him other than we're angry that you exposed our dirty secrets to the American people who pay for it all. Anyway, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here and get some errands done. We'll be back on Monday. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with other people. Now's the time to get noisy in a gentle way.
Yes.
Contact your members of Congress who are up for re-election. Tell them it's time for the wars to come to an end. Contact the White House. Tell them find some way to let Assange free, because he has not really done anything wrong for the American people or the American nation. He just embarrassed people in the military who are guilty of war crimes. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.